I need you to hear this clearly, because what I'm about to say isn't superstition, folklore, or fear-based teaching. It's something I learned while I was deeply involved in witchcraft. During nights when assignments were given, when monitoring spirits were released, and when we understood exactly why midnight mattered. Midnight was never just a time on the clock to us. It was a shift point, a boundary hour, a moment when spiritual traffic increased because most people were physically tired, emotionally open, and spiritually disengaged. We didn't attack randomly. We observed. We waited. And midnight was when resistance was lowest. I remember being shocked when I realized how many believers unknowingly made themselves vulnerable after midnight, not through sin, but through habits, conversations, thoughts, entertainment, words spoken without awareness. We weren't looking for perfect people. We were looking for unguarded moments. Let me say this clearly: midnight does not give darkness power. Permission does, but midnight often reveals who is alert and who is spiritually asleep. I didn't leave witchcraft to keep these things hidden. I left because silence keeps people confused, and confusion keeps cycles repeating. If you've ever noticed that anxiety increases at night, that intrusive thoughts appear after midnight, that arguments start late, or that regretful decisions happen in those hours, you're not imagining it. There are three specific things we watched people do after midnight that opened doors consistently. And when those doors opened, pressure followed, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes financially. This message isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to restore authority. Because once you know what not to do, you don't need fear, you need alignment. In witchcraft, midnight represented a transition between resistance and receptivity. People are tired, guard is down, discipline is weaker, emotional filters are thinner. That's not spiritual, it's human. And the enemy exploits human patterns. We were taught that spirits don't prefer strength, they prefer fatigue. They don't look for holiness failures first, they look for exhaustion, isolation, and emotional openness. That's why the Bible repeatedly associates the night with watchfulness, not fear, awareness. Midnight didn't create vulnerability, it exposed it. The first thing we watched closely after midnight was speech. People speak differently when they're tired. They confess fears they suppress during the day. I'm tired of life. Nothing ever works. I don't see a future. I feel stuck. These weren't venting statements to us, they were verbal agreements. Words spoken after midnight carried unusual weight because emotional defenses were down. People unknowingly gave permission through cursing language. Believers who guarded their speech at night were protected. Those who didn't often experienced lingering heaviness the next day. Never speak hopelessness over your life after midnight. Silence is safer than careless words. The second thing we counted on was what people watched and listened to after midnight: horror content, crime obsession, occult curiosity, fear-driven news, emotional music tied to heartbreak or rage. Midnight viewing created emotional alignment that spirits used as access points. Dark content doesn't just affect your mind, it shifts atmosphere, and atmosphere determines what can remain. We avoided homes filled with worship or peaceful silence, but homes consuming fear based content late at night became spiritually noisy, easy to disturb. What you allow into your mind after midnight matters more than people realize. This one surprises people. Staying awake late without purpose, scrolling endlessly, replaying regrets, overthinking, created mental vulnerability. Idle wakefulness led to intrusive thoughts, emotional spirals, and internal accusations. The enemy doesn't need to attack when a person is attacking themselves internally. Believers who rested intentionally were protected. Rest closed doors. Sleep guarded minds. Midnight was dangerous not because people were awake, but because they were unguarded. We feared believers who prayed briefly before sleep, who spoke peace over their minds, who rested without guilt, who didn't argue late at night, who shut off chaos intentionally. We feared those who treated midnight as a time of rest, not rumination. Darkness cannot stay where peace rules. You don't need rituals. You need alignment. Speak blessing, not frustration. Choose peace over stimulation. Rest without guilt. Pray briefly but sincerely. Invite God's presence calmly. Midnight doesn't belong to darkness. It never did. I'm not sharing this to glorify witchcraft. I'm exposing its weakness. Darkness depends on ignorance. Light operates on awareness. Once you know what not to do, authority returns naturally. You don't need to fight at midnight. You need to rest in truth. Welcome to the restoration path. One of the biggest lies people believe is that darkness is stronger at night. That isn't true. Darkness is not empowered by time, it is empowered by ignorance and agreement. Midnight only becomes effective when people don't understand what is happening internally during those hours. In witchcraft, we understood timing deeply, not because time had power, but because human vulnerability follows patterns. Midnight exposed fatigue, loneliness, unresolved emotions. And when people didn't know how to govern their thoughts at that hour, pressure felt spiritual, when it was actually psychological leverage being exploited. But here's what the enemy never wants you to realize. Once timing is exposed, its advantage disappears. We were trained to retreat when people were aware. Awareness collapsed strategies instantly. When someone chose peace instead of spiraling thoughts, when they shut down fear based entertainment, when they rested instead of rehearsing worries, every assignment lost momentum. Midnight stopped being an entry point and became a dead zone. Darkness does not adapt well to clarity. It relies on confusion, repetition, and emotional fog. When you understand that midnight is simply a transition, not a threat, authority returns naturally. This is why some believers wake up refreshed, while others wake up drained. One surrendered the night to anxiety. The other governed it with rest and truth. The moment you stop fearing midnight, you reclaim it. And once reclaimed, it can no longer be used against you. I want you to understand something very clearly before this message ends. You were never meant to fear the night. Fear is not protection. Awareness is. Authority is. And authority comes from knowing who you are and what you carry. In witchcraft, we knew this truth but hated it. Believers who understood authority were untouchable, not because nothing tried to come against them, but because nothing could stay. The night didn't bend them, it bowed to the peace they carried. Midnight is not a curse hour, it is simply an hour. And once you stop giving it emotional power, it loses spiritual leverage. Darkness cannot dominate what is governed by truth. You don't need to stay awake fighting imaginary battles. You don't need fear-driven prayers. What shuts down darkness is calm confidence, resting in God's covering, trusting His presence, and refusing to agree with anxiety. Before you sleep, speak peace over your mind. Dedicate your rest to God. Release the weight of the day. When your body rests, your spirit remains guarded. I didn't leave witchcraft to warn you so you could panic. I left so you could rest without fear. Because rest is one of the enemy's greatest defeats. So tonight, don't resist the night. Rule it. Don't fear the darkness. Expose it with understanding. Don't stay awake anxious. Rest in authority. This is how the night loses power. Welcome to the restoration path.